I met a guy once who was a big little person. From a distance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when you got a little bit closer, you'd begin to notice some things, the dwarfism that was locked in his genes. Slightly shorter than you'd expect, arms and legs, but really that was about it. As I said, he was a tall dwarf. I was thinking about him the other day because the idea came to me, is Christopher Ward the biggest microbrand in the world? Hi, I'm Pete McConville, and if you like the idea of thinking way too much, analysing way too much, talking way too much about watches and collecting them and everything around that, then you are in exactly the right place, because that's what I'm about to do. In fact, that's what I routinely do. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, hit the like, subscribe, all that YouTube butt stuff, and crack on in. I really want to address three questions today. One is, what do I think a microbrand is? Do they still exist? And not only is Christopher Ward a microbrand, but are they the world's biggest? Microbrands as a group have kind of defied definition. Every now and then someone tries to. I've toyed with the idea a couple of times of defining a microbrand and generally fail. Something just doesn't quite work in the end. And I think that's because microbrands are like porn. They're not really easy to define, but you know what? When you see one, you know it. And I think now that a microbrand is defined more by the vibe it gives off, by the idea and the values and the concepts that drive it. Microbrands grew out of the whole Kickstarter, do-it-yourself, single man on a journey type thing, and created a lot of the sort of the catchphrases that today are jokes that we openly laugh at. The idea of cutting out the middleman, direct to consumer, open transparency, all of that stuff really came out of those early microbrands. And actually, I would argue, still continues to define the vibe of a microbrand. A microbrand is one which carries on that early Kickstarter spirit. Very transparent, very direct to consumer, cuts out the middleman, really strong emphasis on two things: the individual within it, so you'll see the owner and you'll see the people behind it a lot out there pushing all the time, and a key aspect of everything they talk about will be value, specs, what we can give you for the money that you will pay, and how that will be so much less than anyone else will charge you, particularly the big boys. And it's interesting, if you do look at the big boys, some of which aren't that big. So you might look at a brand like Fortis, which actually is really quite small in terms of the number of watches it makes and its employee numbers and so forth. Or look at other affordable brands, but larger ones, places like Tissot or Hamilton if you go a bit higher. Those guys never, ever compare themselves to someone more expensive than them. They will never talk about themselves being affordable. They will never talk about themselves being valued. They'll simply say, this is what we make. Isn't it great? Oh, by the way, it's $3.99, or it's $399, or it's $3,999. They'll just say that. And they'll leave it up to you to figure out whether that's value and how that compares to the rest of the market. Microbrands don't do that. Microbrands smack you in the face and say, we'll charge you $1,200 for this, but the big boys would charge you $500 or $5,000 or $10,000. That's kind of the vibe of the microbrand. And I think they still exist. There's not a lot of them. A lot of the brands that we used to think of as micro brands have kind of moved on from that. They're trying to become real, normal, everyday, mainstream brands that simply offer products at a price. You either like it or you don't. And they don't beat you around the head anymore with, we are great value. But Christopher Ward does. In Christopher Ward, the micro brand that is deeply encoded in their genes just keeps coming out. They can't help themselves. They are consistently coming out and not only making great product, and they do make great product, and not only is it affordable, and it is affordable, it's very aggressively priced, they can't resist but tell you. They can't resist but put it in all their marketing material. And their front man, Mike Francis, can't resist but come on and consistently beat that drum and talk about how much work they're doing and how they're changing the business and how they're representing a new model and all of this stuff that we've been hearing, or we used to hear from micro brands, those brands starting out on Kickstarter, but that most people have left behind. But Christopher Ward hasn't. Despite the fact they are now a big brand, despite the fact they now hold inventory and they bought a Swiss movement maker. They've got a substantial industrial footprint. Despite all of that stuff, which would make them bigger than probably, at least they would have more employees, probably more industrial capacity, probably more ability to make things than half the brands that we think of off the top of your head. And yet they continue to act as though they're just launching on Kickstarter. There's no better example than that, than their recent triumph, and it was a triumph. It's a great watch, the Belcanto, where even in the marketing materials, rather than simply say, here is this product, it's fantastic, and leave it for us to work out, the value prop there. And there is an amazing value prop. They couldn't resist themselves. There had to be comparisons to the products that other people make. There had to be statements about, look how cheap we are, look how we work with other people. All of this other stuff that other brands have moved on from and don't feel the need to say anymore. So for that reason, that brings me back to this idea of the tall dwarf, the big little person, the person who, despite the fact that they're growing, despite the fact that they're about the same size or bigger than a lot of others, in their genes, they can never escape the consequences of their encoding. There's always going to be something about them that marks them out as out of the ordinary. And I see that with Christopher Ward. There's something in their genes, something in the way that they can't help but talk that marks them out as a perennial, a forever, an eternal micro brand. Now, the great question for me is, what does that mean? Is that going to be limiting to them? Or conversely, is there a market where someone can be a giant little person? Is there a market where someone can be a huge player, making serious cash, making it into the top 50 watch brands in the world, whilst at the same time having those micro brand genes that just keep expressing themselves? I really don't know. I'll be absolutely frank. For me, it is a massive turnoff. That constant micro brand language about how value oriented we are and the 3-for-1 rule and all that stuff, I actually find that puts me off the brand. But that's just me. Maybe there's enough people that love that stuff and will embrace the brand and take it to the very top. I have no idea. This is going to be something that's going to be fascinating to watch as we move forward. So I'm not trying really to put forward, to prognosticate about what the long-term future of Christopher Ward will be, can be, or how far they can go. But I am putting it out there that it's going to be worth watching. Or will they need to drop that shtick at some point? Will they need to move on and move away from the whole transparency rules and their I think it's 3-for-1 sort of product rule and all that sort of stuff, and just become like everyone else if they want to grow as big as everyone else. I don't know. It's something worth watching. Anyway, so I've been Pete McConville. Would love to know your thoughts. Is it still worth thinking about microbrands at all? Do you agree or disagree with my idea of a microbrand? Do you think that, at least in my concept, that Christopher Ward would count as a giant amongst microbrands, the biggest microbrand in the world? Can you think of someone else who's bigger, who has those same genes and is still expressing them? Anyway, as I said, leave comments below. I'd love to hear your ideas. I've been Pete McConville. Like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, and I will see you later. Bye.